I used to believe my marriage was unshakable. For 3 decades, I had worn the title of wife like a second skin, the role so deeply woven into my identity that I couldn't imagine myself without it. Richard and I were a picture of stability: the big house with white shutters, the carefully manicured gardens that made neighbors pause to admire, the family dinners where our daughter Emily would chatter about school, and the quiet glances Richard and I shared across the table, the kind of glances that convinced everyone. We were the couple who made it work. I believed that too. Until I couldn't anymore. I was 52 when my world shifted. But the truth is, the unraveling had started long before. It began as little things I brushed aside. The way Richard's compliments became less frequent, his patience shorter, his absence heavier. It's easy to ignore the small cracks when you're terrified of what you'll see if you stare too long. So I convinced myself it was normal. That, after 30 years, maybe love simply quieted down. But love shouldn't go silent. That spring, the silence grew deafening. Emily had gone off to graduate school, and the house, once alive with laughter and chaos, felt cavernous. I tried to fill the void gardening, volunteering, hosting book clubs, but I couldn't fill the space. Richard had vacated in spirit long before he vacated it in body. One evening, I set the table for two, as always. The house smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, his favorite. When Richard finally walked in, I noticed something that hadn't fully registered before. He didn't look at me. Not really. His eyes slid past mine, his smile shallow, his hands busy loosening his tie as though I were just another part of the routine he endured after work. "Long day?" I asked. "Soft, tentative, always," he muttered, already retreating to his study. The sound of his office door shutting echoed through the hall like a verdict. I sat at the table alone, staring at his untouched plate, the empty chair across from me. That's when I knew something was breaking. Still, I clung to denial. Until the evidence forced its way into my hands. It began with a receipt, harmless, really crumpled in the pocket of his blazer. Dinner for two? At a restaurant we'd never been to. The cost was extravagant, even for Richard. My throat tightened, but I folded it carefully and placed it back. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. But once the seed of doubt takes root, it grows fast. The late nights, the business trips that didn't fit his usual patterns, the whispered calls he took on the patio. I tried to explain them away, but deep down I knew. A woman always knows. The moment of truth came one night when Richard left his phone on the counter while showering. I stood there staring at it, my hands shaking. For 30 years I had trusted him, but trust, once fragile, can shatter with the smallest push. I picked it up, the screen lit with messages. Words that gutted me in seconds. Her name was Rachel, and she wasn't just a fling. She was someone he cherished, someone he confessed his soul to, someone he said made him feel alive. I scrolled, numb, until I saw my own name. "Elizabeth doesn't understand me the way you do." Elizabeth? Me, reduced to a complaint? A footnote. I dropped the phone like it was poison. My knees buckled. I gripped the counter, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. A woman I barely recognized. I wasn't the boring wife he wrote about. I wasn't invisible. I was the woman who had stood beside him through every high, every low, every long night building the empire he enjoyed. And this was my reward. I carried the secret for 2 days, moving through the house like a ghost, cooking, cleaning, smiling faintly when he spoke. But inside, I was already mourning the marriage I thought I had. On the third night, I couldn't pretend anymore. When Richard walked into the kitchen, I was waiting, his phone clutched in my hand. "Who is Rachel?" My voice trembled, but it carried steel. He froze. The panic in his eyes lasted a heartbeat before he slipped on the mask again. "She's a colleague. Don't start imagining things. Colleagues don't write the kind of messages you wrote to her." His jaw tightened. "Elizabeth, you're overreacting. You always do this. Making mountains out of molehills, gaslighting." He thought he could twist the truth, make me doubt what I had read with my own eyes. "I saw everything," I whispered. The silence that followed felt louder than any argument we'd ever had. Finally, he sighed, annoyed. "Elizabeth, you're 52. We've been married 3 decades. Things change. People change." It wasn't just the betrayal in that moment. It was the implication that I was too old, too faded, too... "Less things change," I repeated, tears pricking my eyes. "But loyalty doesn't. Commitment doesn't," he shrugged. "Maybe you're just not cut out for this stage of life. That sentence cut deeper than any admission of cheating could. I went to bed in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling, my chest hollow. By morning, something had shifted. The tears dried. The devastation hardened. I wasn't going to be the woman he thought I was. Weak, broken, disposable. I reached out to a lawyer, Carol, a sharp, unflinching woman who saw me not as a victim but as a fighter. "Elizabeth," she told me, sliding a file across the table, "you've given him 30 years. Don't let him take another 30 from you. You have more power than you think." Her words ignited something in me. I began digging through bank statements, tax records, files Richard thought I'd never touch. What I found made my blood run cold. He wasn't just betraying me emotionally. He was betraying me financially. Hidden accounts, investments tied to Rachel. He was building a future with her with my sacrifices, my years, my trust. That was the moment grief turned into resolve. Every night I journaled my vows. I will not be erased. I will not let him win. I will not disappear. The night I packed my suitcase, Richard sneered, "Where do you think you're going, Elizabeth? You can't survive without me." I zipped the bag slowly, meeting his eyes. "Watch me," because he was wrong. Women over 50 are not weak. We are not fading. We are not invisible. We are survivors. Carriers of wisdom, strength, scars, the kind of strength no betrayal can erase. And while Richard thought he was discarding me for someone younger, what he really did was set me free. Free to fight, free to rebuild, free to rise. As I drove away from the house that had once been my world, I whispered into the night, "He thought I was weak after 50, but I am only just beginning." When I left that night, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I had confronted Richard. I had named the betrayal. I had walked away. But walking away from a man is not the same as walking away from the life you built together. The money, the security, the reputation, that was what Richard counted on. That I would crumble outside the walls of the house we shared. That I would run back into the prison of familiarity, begging for scraps of his affection. But he didn't know me anymore. Or maybe he never did. The first weeks were brutal. I stayed in a rented apartment downtown, small, sterile, the kind of place you don't decorate because you're not sure how long you'll be there. Every morning I woke up to the same questions. How could 30 years mean so little? And every night I went to bed hearing his voice. "You can't survive without me." I wanted to believe he was wrong. But in the quiet hours, I was afraid he might be right. It was Carol, my lawyer, who kept me grounded. "Elizabeth," she said during one of our early meetings, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, "you're not just fighting for divorce papers. You're fighting for your life's worth. And he's counting on you being too broken to claim it." She was right. We began the slow, grueling process of piecing together Richard's financial web. For years, I'd signed documents he placed in front of me without question. Tax returns, business contracts, loan agreements. I had been the wife who trusted, the wife who didn't pry. Now, every signature felt like a betrayal I had unknowingly committed against myself. I pored over boxes of papers, highlighting, circling, cross-referencing, and with each discovery, my grief hardened into fury. Offshore accounts, real estate I didn't know we owned. And worst of all, he had funneled money into a joint venture with Rachel. Not just dinners and jewelry. He was building her a life he thought he could fund with the bones of mine. It wasn't just financial. He began a campaign to ruin me emotionally too. The whispers started. Friends I had known for decades suddenly avoided my calls. Women from our country club looked at me with pity thinly veiled as curiosity. One even leaned close during a charity event and said, "It's just so sad, Elizabeth, at your age, to be left for someone younger. I can't imagine." I smiled politely. I saved my tears for the car. It became clear Richard was feeding them a narrative. I was the fragile wife, the one who couldn't keep up, the one who had let herself go. Rachel was painted as the fresh, vibrant woman who had saved him. Saved him. For me, I burned with humiliation. But beneath that, something else stirred. A dangerous, determined voice whispering, "Let them think you're weak. It will make your victory sweeter." One night, I returned to my apartment to find a letter slipped under the door. No envelope, just folded paper with Richard's handwriting. "You're embarrassing yourself, Elizabeth. Drop the fight. Take the settlement. Move on quietly. It's the dignified thing to do." Settlement. His offer was insulting, a fraction of what we had built. enough to keep me comfortable if I played the part of the discarded wife who fades into the background. I crumpled the paper in my fist, my chest burning. That night I opened my journal and wrote, "He wants me to disappear. Instead, I will rise so high he won't be able to look me in the eye from that moment." I lived two lives by day. I was the picture of composure. I attended legal meetings. I nodded politely at whispers. I endured Richard's smugness in court when he paraded Rachel on his arm, like a prize he had won. By night, I studied. I taught myself financial literacy, reading books, watching tutorials, calling in favors from old friends who knew business better than I did. Carol connected me with a forensic accountant, and together, we traced Richard's empire piece by piece. The more I understood, the stronger I felt. But strength is never linear. There were nights when grief drowned me. Nights I scrolled through old photos of vacations, birthdays, anniversaries. Richard's arm around my waist, his smile directed at me, his words forever echoing in my head. I asked myself, was it ever real? Or was I simply convenient until I wasn't? On one of those nights, Emily called Mom. She said gently, "I don't know everything, but I know you don't deserve this. Dad may think he's starting fresh, but you can start, too. Just because you're over 50 doesn't mean your story is over." Her words broke something open in me, because I realized she was watching. My daughter, my legacy. If I surrendered, what would that teach her? That women over 50 fade? That betrayal defines us? No. I would show myself that betrayal could be fuel. The turning point came when Carol slid another file across her desk. We found something. It was a deed. A property in Rachel's name, purchased with funds siphoned from accounts I had co-signed. Richard had forged my signature. That was criminal. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes when we confronted him in court. His arrogance cracked just a little, and I realized this man who thought I couldn't survive without him was terrified of what I could become without him. I began to play the role he least expected. Strategist. While he flaunted Rachel in public, I quietly secured allies, lawyers, financial experts, even friends who had once doubted me but began to see through his performance. And then, one evening, I stood in front of the mirror. I saw the lines on my face, the silver threads in my hair, the years etched into my skin. For the first time in months, I didn't see weakness. I saw armor, every wrinkle a battle, every scar a testament. Richard had mistaken age for fragility, but age had given me something Rachel could never match. Resilience. The woman staring back at me was no longer the betrayed wife. She was a force he couldn't control. And as I whispered to my reflection, this isn't the end of my story. I knew. Act 2 of my life was just beginning. The day of the confrontation began like any other. A quiet morning, the sun spilling across my modest apartment, the smell of coffee filling the kitchen. But there was a current in the air. A trembling energy that told me something was about to shift. Carol had arranged it, a mediation session. She called it, though we both knew it was a battlefield dressed in polite language. Richard would be there, of course, and Rachel smug in her newfound role. But there was also someone else when the knock came on my door. I expected Carol instead. I opened it to a man I had never seen before. Tall, serious, with a calm confidence in his eyes. He introduced himself as James Whitaker, a private investigator and attorney who specialized in uncovering fraud. "I was hired to protect your interests, Mrs. Harrington," he said, offering his card. "Your friend Carol thought you might need an ally with sharper tools." For a moment I was stunned. Another ally, someone working quietly on my behalf? And then it struck me, Carol wasn't just my lawyer. She was my guardian, planting seeds of protection I hadn't even known I needed. I let him in. Over coffee, James laid it out. Richard's financial betrayals went deeper than we had imagined. Shell companies? Hidden trusts? He had even begun transferring assets into the names of people I knew. People I trusted. That was when he said the name, not my brother, Thomas. For years, Thomas had been the supportive uncle, the charming family man who hovered on the edges of our gatherings with his easy smile and polished compliments. But James's documents showed something darker. Thomas had been Richard's silent partner. Not only in business but in betrayal. I felt the blood drain from my face. Memories flashed, Thomas leaning a little too close at family dinners, his eyes lingering longer than they should. And then, the memory that seared like fire. The night he confessed he once hoped I would marry him, before Richard had stolen me away. I had laughed it off then, thinking it foolish nostalgia. But James's voice cut through the haze. He's been waiting for years, James said quietly. And Richard used that. They're not just allies in business. They're allies in undermining you. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the room apart. But instead, I sat very still, my hands folded tightly in my lap, and whispered, "Then it's time we stop playing defense." The mediation was set in a sterile downtown office, all glass and steel, with a view of the city that mocked the ruin of my marriage. Richard walked in first, his expensive suit pressed to perfection. Rachel trailing behind in a dress that screamed money she hadn't earned. Thomas was there too. He smiled when he saw me, a smile that once might have felt warm. Now it felt poisonous. Carol nodded at me from across the table, James beside her, his files stacked neatly. I sat straight-backed, my heart pounding, but my voice steady when I said, "Let's begin." Richard leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Elizabeth, why are we dragging this out? You're only making it worse for yourself. Take the settlement, keep your dignity, and stop embarrassing us all." Embarrassing us? My jaw tightened. The only one embarrassing himself here, Richard, is you. And I'm not walking away empty-handed. Not after 30 years. Rachel giggled softly, a sound like nails on glass. "Elizabeth, it's not personal. Love just happens. Richard deserves happiness." I turned to her slowly. "Happiness built on lies isn't happiness. It's rot dressed in perfume." Her smile faltered. Then Carol slid a folder across the table. "Perhaps we should address the forged signatures," she said coolly. Richard's smirk slipped, just slightly. James opened another folder. "And while we're at it, let's discuss the fraudulent property transfers, particularly the ones involving your brother-in-law, Thomas." The room went cold. Thomas's face darkened. "What are you implying?" I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "No, James, let me." "What he's implying, Thomas, is that while I was building a family, you were building a trap, and you thought I would never notice because you've always believed I was too soft, too trusting, too weak." My voice broke on that word, but only because of the fire beneath it. For a moment, the silence was unbearable. Richard shifted uncomfortably, Rachel looked confused, and Thomas stared at me with a fury I hadn't seen before. "You think you can outsmart us?" he hissed. I straightened my shoulders. "I don't have to outsmart you. I just have to expose you. And I will." The hours that followed were chaos. Papers flew across the table. Voices rose, accusations hurled like knives. Richard tried to charm his way out, claiming misunderstandings. Rachel clung to his arm, her confidence waning with every revelation. And Thomas, he showed his true face. He ranted about how Richard had everything handed to him, how I should have chosen differently, how he had waited for decades while I played house. His bitterness filled the room like poison gas, and in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, about resentment, about men who couldn't bear a woman over 50 standing tall without them. When the session ended, nothing was resolved. The documents were damning, but Richard's lawyers were slippery, buying time, spinning lies. As we gathered our papers, Richard leaned close, his voice low so only I could hear. "You'll regret this, Elizabeth. You're poking a beast you can't control." I looked him in the eye and said, "The only beast in this room is you, and beasts can be caged." That night, alone in my apartment, I replayed every word, every look. My heart was a storm of fear and fury, but beneath it, a steel resolve had taken root. They thought they had me cornered. Richard with his arrogance, Rachel with her smug youth, Thomas with his festering bitterness, but they had underestimated the one thing betrayal gives you: clarity. And as I closed my eyes, I whispered to myself, "This is not the end. The reckoning is coming." The storm had broken, but the rain hadn't stopped. That mediation was supposed to be the final showdown, but it had only pulled the masks away. I saw Richard for the manipulative man he had always been. I saw Rachel's smugness begin to crumble as she realized her luxury was hanging by a thread. And I saw Thomas, my brother-in-law, for what he truly was: a man consumed by resentment, whose bitterness had turned him into Richard's perfect accomplice. But what they didn't realize was that I was no longer the Elizabeth they thought they could corner. I wasn't the wife they could talk over, the woman they could silence with intimidation, or the sister-in-law who would laugh off inappropriate advances. I had been broken down, humiliated, betrayed, and I had rebuilt myself into something stronger than they could imagine, and I had allies now. Carol, James even. Strangers who had walked through the wreckage of betrayal and chosen to stand with me. The next move was mine. The days following the mediation were thick with tension. Richard tried to bluff his way back into control, sending messages through his attorney that painted me as unstable, ungrateful, even dangerous. Rachel posted pictures online flaunting her life as though nothing had happened, her diamond bracelets glinting, her lips pressed to Richard's cheek in a desperate attempt to sell the lie of happiness. And Thomas, he went quiet, which I knew was more dangerous than any outburst. James urged me to let him take the lead. "We have enough to bring fraud charges," he said. "But timing is everything. If we move too soon, they'll bury assets and twist public opinion. If we wait too long, they'll dig deeper into their schemes." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something that would either end me or set me free. It happened on a rainy Thursday night. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Rachel. Her voice trembled, stripped of its smugness. "Elizabeth, we need to meet, please. Just us. No lawyers, no Richard." I nearly hung up, but something in her tone, the desperation, stopped me. Against every instinct screaming at me, I agreed. We met in a quiet cafe downtown, the kind of place with chipped mugs and old jazz drifting from a radio. Rachel sat in the corner, her hair pulled back, her face pale. She looked nothing like the woman who had strutted into mediation on Richard's arm. "Why am I here?" I asked flatly. She clasped her hands together. "Because I made a mistake. I thought Richard loved me. I thought I was chosen, but I'm just a pawn. And so are you." I said nothing, waiting. She leaned closer. "Thomas isn't just his business partner. He's been funding everything. The houses, the cars, even some of Richard's so-called investments. And in return, Thomas wants something more than money." Her eyes flicked up to mine. "He wants you." The room spun. Even though I had always suspected, to hear it laid out so bluntly was like being slapped. Rachel's voice cracked. "Richard laughs about it. Says Thomas has been obsessed with you for decades. Says he's the one who convinced Richard to go after you in the first place, because he wanted to prove he could take what Thomas wanted. They've been playing you like a prize in some sick competition." I gripped the edge of the table. "Fury burning hot enough to scorch me from the inside out," Rachel whispered. "I don't want to be part of this anymore. He's not who I thought he was. None of them are." For the first time, I saw her not as the enemy, but as another victim of Richard's manipulation. Younger, naive, foolish. Yes. But still, a woman caught in the same web I had escaped. I slid a napkin toward her. "Then help me end it." What Rachel told me that night changed everything. With James's help, we traced the financial threads she revealed. Secret accounts, backroom deals, and a network of shell companies that tied Richard and Thomas together in ways they had fought hard to conceal. But the true weapon wasn't the money. It was the motive. I remembered Thomas's proposal all those years ago. How he had cornered me at a family gathering, his breath thick with whiskey, his voice low and insistent. "You don't belong with him, Elizabeth. You belong with me. I could give you more than Richard ever will." I had laughed it off, uncomfortable, brushing it away as drunken nonsense. But now, I saw it clearly. That rejection had festered, and Richard, ever the opportunist, had twisted it into leverage. Thomas hadn't just betrayed me for money. He had betrayed me because I had chosen another man, and now they were both about to lose everything. The final confrontation wasn't in a boardroom or a courtroom. It was in Richard's grand home, the home I had once decorated, once filled with laughter and holidays and family dinners. A home that no longer felt like mine. James arranged it carefully under the guise of final negotiations. Richard thought he was about to corner me into accepting his settlement. Thomas thought his silence had kept him safe. But I walked into that house armed with more than lawyers. I had truth. As we gathered in the living room, thunder rolling outside, I placed a folder on the table. "Before we begin, I think you should both see this." Inside were documents Rachel had helped me uncover. Proof of Thomas's financial involvement, proof of forged signatures, proof of their collusion. Richard's face went pale. Thomas's turned red. "This is nonsense," Richard snapped. "Fabrications." James's voice cut through the room like steel. "These are certified copies from financial institutions. It's over." Thomas slammed his fist on the table. You think this will save you, Elizabeth? You think exposing us will make you the victor? You'll burn too. I looked him dead in the eye. I'd rather burn with the truth than rot with your lies. The room erupted. Richard shouting, Thomas pacing, Rachel trembling in the corner. But in the chaos, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power for the first time. They weren't controlling the narrative. I was. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal motions, court hearings, and endless interviews. Richard was charged with fraud and embezzlement. Thomas faced conspiracy charges. Their empire crumbled, piece by piece, until the men who once believed they held all the power were reduced to defendants scrambling for plea deals. And me, I walked out with my head high. Not just with a settlement, though I secured more than they ever intended me to. I walked out with my dignity, my freedom, and a story that was truly mine. 6 months later, I stood in a sunlit studio, paintbrush in hand, canvas before me. The walls were lined with my art, bright, bold, unapologetic. Life had found me again, not in the shadow of betrayal, but in the light of renewal. Rachel had left Richard long before the trial ended. She wrote me once, apologizing again, telling me she was rebuilding her life in another state. I wished her well. As for Thomas, I never saw him again. His letters from prison went unanswered, but Richard tried to reach out, begging for forgiveness, for some scrap of connection. I never responded. Some doors must remain closed. Because forgiveness, I learned, is not about letting someone back into your life. It's about freeing yourself from their grip. And I was free. Now, when I look back, I don't see a woman who was broken. I see a woman who was tested, who was underestimated, who was betrayed in ways that would have shattered many. And yet, I rose. I discovered that after 50, life doesn't end. Sometimes it finally begins, because when Richard thought I was weak, he awakened something he never anticipated. A woman who knew her worth, who found her strength, and who built a new life not in spite of betrayal, but because of it, and that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all.